So Kristian, thank you so much for being with us. Really thankful for that opportunity. We decided to do this a bit differently, maybe due to COVID, try to do it in a more conversational tone, and see how that goes. I was wondering maybe if you could tell us a bit about yourself and your interesting kind of background, your IDEO, and what you're doing currently.
Oh, well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And Iceland holds a special place in my heart. I think I've been there 4 or 5 times on trips to Europe, and really always wished I could stay more and see more of the people. And such a wonderful, advanced, modern culture with roots in fishing. And I've just always loved that contrast in Iceland. Myself, I had planned to be an architect, and somehow my architecture department didn't have computers in 1984 when I was joining, and my high school had, and that was so disappointing that I decided to become a computer scientist and sort of make some computer stuff that I could use. And I ended up in robotics, which kind of makes sense. If you like take computer science and architecture and mash them together, you kind of end up with moving sculptures. And in the 90s, I did a lot of research in robotics and virtual reality, and I actually did a lot of work in schools as well. As like the question was, how do we bring the computers into schools without the mice and the keyboards? And we did a lot of really fun, tangible interfaces where you were working with computers through speech and through touch and telling stories. And that work, as a kind of scientist inventing the future, led me to IDEO, where I spent 17 years. And the first 10 were really focused on working with Fortune, let's say 500 companies, large companies who struggle to innovate, doing innovation with technology for them, mobile phones, and also processes, a lot of process work and a lot of space work, building out spaces for people to collaborate in, because I think, as we know, office spaces aren't the most creative places in the world. And then I left there full-time in 2011 to respond to an invitation to start some educational programs, because we didn't have STEM-based creative programs in the Bay Area. It was about the time I was involved in starting the D School at Stanford, which people might know. And that was a program for across all disciplines at Stanford, mostly engineering, but it really wasn't about hands making. Like the kind of work we did at IDEO was really based on design and people working with their hands. And so I went to the California College of the Arts, and I started first a BFA, which was the first in the world for interaction design, which is a STEM discipline to shape technology. And about 3 or 4 years after that, we got a couple of awards, and we started a graduate program, master's program to shape technology. And then I was able to help hire my replacement as the administrator. So that program is running, and I have the privilege of teaching as a professor in that. And in 2018, I started a business called Collective Creativity to bring forth collective action in the world. And there's sort of a deeper thing, is I think personally, and maybe this is kind of getting to our conversation, I think war is one of the stupidest things that humans can do. And I believe that we can be creative together, and that we only do wars when we think the only choice is to fight or run. And if we can get in touch with our creativity, then we have a lot more choices. You know, a lot of wars are about food and land. And I think we're seeing that land can be far more productive than we ever thought in the early part of the 20th century. Sorry, the early part of the 20th century and before. So maybe that's my history, and here I am.
Yeah. It's interesting for us Icelanders having no military at all. So this discussion about war and peace and the reasons is quite relative to us, and of course inequality as such. And then it kind of pulls us back to education. But I read some of your work, really impressed by this approach of yours. You talk a lot about qualities that come from your heart, for example. Could you maybe tell us a bit more about what is it that we need to focus on in education in the future, and for these future generations, like the sets that are now coming to universities, and even the alphas that might even not be in high school yet? Like what does the world look like for them?
Oh, this is a great question. So I could talk a lot about curriculum, which maybe we'll get to. I'd also like to talk about kind of the state of the world and the state of work and how that's shifting, because I think education is often serving work. You know, I think there's a big, like, why do we have education, right? It's to make people valuable and productive in society, and then self-actualization is like a second, you know, priority, right? But almost always the first priority is really about being a productive member of society. So the work world is very important for education. The two programs I founded, the bachelor's and the master's, have a theory of change, which is about hands, head, and heart. And this is design. This is design and working with your hands. So the hands part in a design school is really important. Like you're drawing, you're making. You know, the students that thrive in a design art school are the ones who will spend 12 hours making something and not even look at their watch. You know, so it's mostly for our context about making. And, you know, you'll find that in a lot of places, in music certainly, but also in a lot of the non-arts. And then there's head, you know, which is really, I think about as process skills. So the first one's about craft skills, the hands, and then the head is really about process skills. Like, how do you cope? How do you cope with ambiguity, and how do you move forward? And then the third part was heart, was really kind of doing the right stuff. You know, I think, as we all know, creativity can create monstrous things. You know, the AK-47, right? Is that right? You know, is one of the most beautiful, elegant machines around, but it is an incredible killing machine. You know, it's simple, it's cheap, and it can kill 100 people in a few seconds. And that feels like when we come from fear, we create those kind of things. And when we come from love, we create different things, right? We could look at all the weapons, of course. And so this place of where you come from and what you do with your hands and what you do with your head really depends on this kind of like, and in some ways fear and love are the same thing. They're just the opposite, you know, is where you're coming from. So this is why I think it's so important. And, you know, our students are focused on the tech industry, you know, which is now affecting the world. I don't think there's anyone in the world who doesn't know about Google and Amazon and Apple, and at least has heard about these things, even if you're in a remote village. And we have a theory of giving students the hand skills to get jobs in those places, because they know how to create value for those companies, give them the head skills to get a seat at the table, and give them the heart skills, working with community and et cetera. And we can talk about that more, in order to have a seat, you know, at that table, coming from a place of compassion. That's our theory. That's our theory of change. And we've got hundreds of grads out there now doing wonderful work. So hopefully it's shifting a little bit.
But when it comes to education and the education from the heart, I mean, how can you, especially when we look at like the topic of today, this lifelong learning, and people that are in that segment that are maybe lacking some traits or some skills, how can you kind of embrace the qualities that comes from the heart, like things like curiosity or creativity, or what I'm really interested in also is like agility or flexibility? I mean, can you stimulate those traits to these groups?
You can. And do you think we've established like why? Yeah, maybe the war is scary enough, but also work is changing, you know, and you must have felt this in Iceland, right? Like first we felt like all the labor was going abroad, right? Because there was cheap labor elsewhere. So all the factories disappeared. And I imagine this is true in every country, right? They used to have local factories, they all disappeared, right? And they go to wherever the labor is cheapest. And if you're listening to this, it's probably not in your country, you know. And then we started seeing all the information jobs. So with the third revolution, the computer revolution, the knowledge revolution, we then started to see all the knowledge work go abroad, the computer programming jobs, the data filing jobs. You know, a lot of times these are repetitive jobs that people weren't too excited about, but sometimes they were, you know, what people knew, and they were really creating great value and having good salaries. So those went to especially countries like India, you know, was really been big on the offshoring of information jobs, right? And this is because the work is changing. Now we're having automation come up, right? So all of this work that is patterns, right? And there's funny because there's body patterns. I'm going to get to the heart in just a second. There's body patterns, you know, like I take this and I put it there. That's robots, right? I take this thing and I put it there, or I screw this thing into exactly this torque. This is something robots do much better than humans. as long as it can be repetitive and it's precise. And then the same with information. And the strange thing about machine learning is, and I think this is why people get so scared and they start talking about robots taking over the world, is that machine learning replaces the kind of thing that we think of as expertise. And I think this is really scary, because if you go and you learn 10 years or something, you know, you study law and then you do another 8 years of practice and you're considered a law expert, machines can almost always replace you pretty quick, because, you know, they're finding fraud in insurance, which is considered an extreme expertise. They're finding tumors in x-rays that even the best experts aren't finding, you know, or they're trained off the best experts, and all of a sudden that best expertise can be replicated across the world instantly, which is wonderful, right? Like, we should all have access to the best x-ray reader in the world. And so this is what I think is kind of scary for people, is that our expertise is like, oh my God, but that's the highest thing that humans can do. But these machines are replacing us, so what's left for me? And this gets to your question, right? And so we're talking about the same thing as, like, what is my purpose in society and what is my meaning and value in society? But also, from a very business perspective, you know, is what is the value of my workers and how do I create value together as these machines come in and these robots come in? What's the use of the people, right? You know,
Exactly.
You know, and I think a lot of people are asking this in places like Davos. You know, they ask these questions like, what are we going to do with all the workers? What, you know, and I think this gets to the question. So I just wanted to motivate that through the way the world is changing and the way work is changing. And the truth is, these are all two fundamental things, is that everything is changing constantly. We've known this forever. Our bodies are changing. The molecules in your body this year are completely different than the molecules they were a year ago. The same with our organizations. They're constantly changing. And then the other thing is, everything is interconnected. And we just have pretended that this didn't exist, whether we build big country walls or our companies. You know, there's this wisdom from 1978. This guy, Michael Porter, wrote this book that every MBA reads. It's, you know, it's called Competitive Advantage. And he talks about the moats. Build a moat around your castle. Your company is a castle. Well, that is just total hogwash today, because it doesn't make sense. Companies aren't castles. This is something medieval. You know, companies are constantly moving. Look at a company like Tesla. And I'm not going to hold Tesla up as a wonderful organization, because the people that work there have a hard time keeping up. But they're constantly moving, constantly moving. And in some ways, that's pointing to the company of the future that is always innovating. It is not a castle sitting somewhere with a wall around it. It is a place that's trying to out-innovate everyone. And so this gets to these things, and I'm going to tie those into the heart. So we talked about head processes, right? Like, you know, we've had all sorts of things like Six Sigma, which guarantee quality. And we're moving into, you know, what are those things for these heart practices? Like, what is a Six Sigma for a heart practice, right? And I think, as you said, so I'm just going to name 5 things, right? 4 of them are C's, which is a little convenient. So curiosity, right? Inherently human, not a robot, not a machine learning thing. It could probably generate some alternatives, but it's really human curiosity, inherently about living people and what we're inspired by. Creativity. Like, how do we take our curiosity and our inspiration and turn it into ideas that are new? And we just have a sense of that, you know, it's like, oh, that's interesting, that's new, you know, and following that. And honestly, education often trains that out of us. So we'll talk about how to get there in a second. Collective action. And I just wanted to put you know, whether you're working in a small group with a partner, you know, like, you know, look at the Beatles, like John Lennon and Paul McCartney are very different people, but they created amazing stuff when they worked together until it kind of fell apart, you know. But like, people get together, they create amazing things. And in a team or in a bigger group or in a company, you know, when things are all working, or a movement, and like a political movement, you know, collective action can just be astounding, right? The other one is compassion. So I'm looking at these human things, right? Is like actual care, the actual wanting of another to benefit and heal and become better and become healthy and actualize, right? And something I think, you know, I haven't spent that much time in understanding the Icelandic politics, but I understand the Swedish politics, and some of my, I did a PhD along the way in human robot collaboration, and some of that sponsorship was from the unions. And this was in the 90s, and they said, Kristian, we're interested in what happens for workers in the age of automation so that they're not de-skilled, right? So this was a fundamental question. So I hope that some of that is true. I see Bárður is nodding, so that ethos is maybe true also a little bit in Iceland. We care about the people, and we care about skilling and not de-skilling, and what people's meaning in place. And then the last one is flexibility. So curiosity, creativity, collective action, compassion, flexibility. These are things that are inherently non-machine-like. They're inherently human. So we've named those. And should I go through? Would it be helpful for me to talk about how maybe we've done those in the classroom?
Yeah, it would be interesting. Kind of, we don't have a lot of time, but it would be really interesting, kind of in a bit of a pragmatic way. Kind of, how do we implement that in the classroom? That would be really interesting.
So curiosity. The easiest way to do that is to not know the answers beforehand, right? A lot of education, I think, especially old kind of education, 100, 200 years ago, maybe in some parts of the world, it's still true. There is a master teaching, and until that student repeats what the master knows, they have not learned. And believe it or not, this is still happening in some countries, right? That you need to know what the master knows, and then you go. And maybe in some places that is interesting, right? We need to convey our knowledge. But a lot of that kind of patterned knowledge, again, is going to machine learning. So we're going to be in a symbiosis with machines, like you can now Google most answers to trivia questions. So how interesting is it to be a trivia expert, right? or to be a knowledge expert. So curiosity, we need to have teachers who believe there's thousands of answers to any question, which means, one, change the mentality of the teacher to not think they know the answer, and two, frame questions in a way that they don't have a single answer. So you're not asking, what was the date of the such and such war, right? Or whatever. You're asking, maybe you're asking a question like, how do we avoid wars? I didn't want to necessarily come up with another war metaphor, or how do we move through a global climate crisis? What is sustainability, and what are some actions that we can take, right? We start to have hundreds or thousands of answers, right? So you're prompting students. And in K through 12, this model is often called inquiry-based learning. So there's project-based learning, and then there's inquiry-based learning. Inquiry-based is different because it can involve many projects. So a move towards inquiry-based learning, in some ways it's a big shift, and in some ways it's a lot of work for the teacher at first, but then it becomes less work. Because what you do is you move from a sage on the stage to a guide on the side. Right? Okay, so creativity. First, you have to value the creativity in the classroom. You have to value that first thing, that there's more than one solution, there's more than one answer to things. And maybe it's even moving away from solution-mindedness, like there's no done. If we're living in systems and everything is changing, if you believe that, then there are no solutions. All there are responses. And so creativity is always in demand. So we need to value this creativity, and we need to understand that, yesterday's answer is not today's answer, right? So like creativity is like the fundamental driving for our society. And I think if we fix that first one, that we think we know what the right answers are and the wrong answers are, then we start to fix creativity, because we're not shutting kids down. In the US, it would be 3rd or 4th grade, right? Yeah. Where we start saying that's not the right answer. Collective action, we're training early on. This is in the social emotional as well, that working with other people can be good, and it's not performative. When I talk about collective action, I think about some more C's. I think about, are you doing capitulation, consensus, or collaboration? Right? Capitulation is, okay, you're right, we'll do it your way, right? Consensus is like, we all agree this is the right way to go. Collaboration can often take the form of like, wow, I didn't even know this was possible. This is when the sum becomes more than the parts, right? So collective action, so doing teamwork, and looking at what they call the, was it the 5 stages: forming, norming, storming. A lot of times teams will stop at storming, like they have a fight, somebody will intervene, often the teacher or whatever, and then just say, okay, why don't you guys just do, Johnny's idea here, or Tracy's idea, and that's stopping the collaboration right there. So we need to move through storming. We need to teach our young people that conflict is good in some ways, because it's bringing up divergence, and we need to work through this divergence and this diverse stuff so forming, norming, storming, performing, transforming, and then the last one is mourning. We often forget to celebrate and kind of maybe have a little grief about that amazing team we were part of. So curiosity, creativity, collective action. Compassion is really moving from the heart, really thinking is this going to help? Is this for the benefit of all living things? The humans, the animals, the ecosystems, the trees, the water, these things are all in trouble right now because our current business practices are not compassionate. They're extractive, and our current dominant business is destroying the planet. So here's another reason why we need to, not only work with these machines and outsource all these things to the machines and focus on these human things. We need more compassion. And if we could shift our businesses to more compassionate business and not be doing this extractive behavior, then we would be getting so much further. And so the last one I list, I think this list goes on further than 5, but was flexibility, right? So the flexibility are things that we're not going to necessarily feel from machines, right? Machines tend to be rigid. Robots tend to be rigid. We're just starting to have more compliant actuators, that can tolerate a few millimeters or a few centimeters of roughness. But that's new. That's not the way computers inherently work. It takes a lot of mechanical and also coding to tolerate that flexibility. The same with expert systems. They're coming out with a percentage about something, and you got to make a decision if that percentage is high enough to confirm. And so flexibility is really about this, knowing it's a growth mindset, right? It's knowing when you're on the wrong track. And it's also a non-scarcity. It's kind of an abundant mindset, that you also believe that if I back up, there's still a place for me to go, right? So if you, let's see, so I said it was growth and it's abundance, right? So if you are not on the learning path, flexibility is hard. Because if it's not the answer I just gave you, I don't know what it is. I ain't got anything for you, right? You fold your arms, and that, that's not going to work, right? Computers will do that fine for you. I don't have an answer for you, right? So we have to be flexible, and we have to have a growth mindset, right? I want to make sure I say this. To have almost any of these heart-centered practices, there has to be emotional safety in the classroom, right? You can't make learning bad. You can't make learning feel bad for students. That we have to create emotional safety for people to fail. Because if we don't, that's going to create fixed mindset, right? So there has to be growth mindset. There can be no growth mindset until there's emotional safety in the classroom. And then on the second one, abundance, you have to believe, to be flexible, you have to believe that there are other choices out there, right? So you have to believe that there's unlimited and thousands of things, which goes back to the curiosity, right? Is believing there are thousands of answers to stuff.
But Kristian, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And hopefully we get to meet in person next time you come over to Iceland.
Oh, I would love that. Thank you, Bárður. Thanks for working with the constraints and making this interview happen. So best to everyone.
Thank you.